Congratulations, you made it to the very last Sunday of the year 2020. I know maybe there were times where you weren't sure if it was going to happen, but that's where we're at today, the last Sunday of the year. I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you're able to hop in that DeLorean with Doc Brown and go back in time all the way back to January 1st of this year. What's some advice that you would give yourself if you could go back in time about the year ahead so that you could plan and prepare and be ready? So think about that for just a moment. I've given you a space at the top of your handout to write in what your advice to yourself would be on January 1st. You got it? You got what your advice would be for January 1st? Perhaps you told yourself to stock up on toilet paper. Or maybe you gave yourself a hot stock tip and said, buy Zoom and buy Amazon. Or perhaps you told yourself, stop right now, stop everything. Those vacation plans that you were thinking about doing in the late spring or summer or fall, stop, go right now. Even though it's January and it might be colder than you want, but go on vacation right now. 2020 has been a challenging year. It's not been the year that any of us were expecting when we rolled out of bed on January 1st and thought about the whole year that was ahead of us. Now, for me, I'm a big fan of memes, particularly ones that are done well and in good taste. And the year 2020 has lacked a lot of things, but memes has not been one of them. So I want to share a few of my favorite memes with you for this year. Thinking about the time travel, we've got the time traveler arrives, and this has been a lot of different versions of this. What year is it? 2020. And then you can see Michael Scott's face. Or for those who are old Friends fans, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your year, hashtag 2020. For the Star Trek fans out there, Captain Picard waking up every day in 2020. Damage report. Or if you are a John Travolta fan, you can see the difference between entering 2020 and leaving 2020. Now for me as your pastor, I've been thinking about this Sunday. I've been thinking about what I would say on the last Sunday of a really challenging year. I've been thinking about this for several weeks now. What can I say to encourage you? What can I say to help you reflect on the year that we've had? And as I've been thinking about it, here's a couple of thoughts. One is that I got to acknowledge the fact that we're all in different places in our spiritual journey. Some of us have been walking with God for a long time. Some of us maybe have just recently started walking with God, and others of us, we might be exploring right now, just checking out the faith. So we're all in different places in our spiritual journey. That's one thing we got to note. And the other thing is that because we're all in different places in our spiritual journey, God has been using the challenges of this year in different ways for each one of us to grow us and to stretch us. So kind of another way to say that is that although we have all experienced the year 2020, our experiences have been different. So there's not a perfect one-size-fits-all message where I can just talk about the one thing from this year. So what I want to do is I want to take more of a shotgun approach rather than the laser beam this morning. So I've called today's message, Hindsight is 2020. Now, I've been wanting to use that title for something this year, and this is my opportunity. But you think about the concept of hindsight. That is, when we look back, we can see. We can see more clearly. Looking forward, often we're looking into the fog. We're looking into the mist, and we can't see that clearly. But when we look back, we can see much more clearly. So that's what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look back at this year, and we're going to take a look at some lessons that we've learned, and maybe we've learned them for the first time this year, or for a lot of us, a lot of these are probably reminders, something that we learned in the past, but this year has really reminded us of that lesson and maybe driven it home at a deeper, more personal level. I also want to look at a key question to consider as we wrap up this year and then look ahead to the year 2021. So let's jump in and take a look at some lessons and reminders from 2020. The first one is this, is that the reality of the broken world we live in. You know, when God created the world, it was perfect. And then it was messed up because of sin. This world is less than what God intended it to be. And this year we have gotten to see the effects of the fall, one of those being diseases. We're living in the middle of a global pandemic, a disease. That's part of the fall. Another one is we're getting to see just different levels of human evilness. We all are evil in our hearts because of the fall. We all have sin deep in our hearts, and we've seen that come up in a variety of different ways here in our own country and around the world during this year of 2020. So we have been reminded of the reality of the broken world that we live in. Another lesson or reminder is that life is not problem-free. As much as we would like to have a problem-free life, that's just not reality. That's not just the way that it is. In fact, Psalm 90:10 says, "The length of our days is 70 years, or 80 if we have the strength. Yet the span is but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and fly away." Part of living in a broken world is living with problems. That's just part of life. Now, I think it's safe to say that this year, in the middle of all of the problems, most of us, if probably not all of us, we have experienced some type of problem. We've experienced some type of loss. Those losses may be greater or smaller, but we've experienced loss. And when you experience loss, then part of what goes with that is grief. Grief is connected to loss. So if we've all experienced loss in some form or another, then we have all experienced grief, or maybe we're experiencing it right now and we're not even aware of the fact that we've been grieving. Grief is an interesting thing. Some describe it as kind of like a wave, like you can be out in the ocean and everything is okay, and then all of a sudden a wave washes over you of just intense emotions, and you're grieving, you're dealing with this loss that has occurred. Often we think about grief tied to death, tied to losing a loved one, but we really go through a grieving process every time we experience loss. Now, experts say that there are multiple stages to grief. I've seen 5 stages, 7 stages, 12 stages, but here are some of the key stages of grief. You have denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. Those are all stages that we work through when we are grieving. In fact, denial is an interesting stage. It's near the top of the list, the first one, and there's this thing I'm going to show you a picture of. It's called the web, or the ball of denial, and you can see all the different emotions involved. You've got rejection, rage, dread, depression, loneliness, betrayal, anger, jealousy, envy, pain, fear. Those are a lot of the emotions that we have felt this year in the year of 2020. So I want you to know that part of this year for many of us has been grief, experiencing grief. In fact, a few weeks ago, Pastor Brian Kropp, he talked about our response to loss in a message and said, what should our response be? He said we need to weep, wait, and connect. We need to weep means that it's okay to cry. It's okay to mourn the loss. That's really okay. You don't want to get stuck there, but it's okay to weep when you need to weep. And then you need to wait. For many of us this year, 2020 has been a year of waiting to do fill in the blank, waiting for the next thing, waiting to see what's going to happen. So part of that process is waiting, and I'm not sure how much longer we're going to have to wait for life to go back to normal, whatever that's going to look like. But that's part of the process, is waiting, and then connecting with God and connecting with others. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but this has been a year of loss. It's been a year of grief, and we have been reminded or learned that life is not problem-free. The next thing we've learned or been reminded of is that tomorrow is not guaranteed. There's no guarantees about the future. In fact, James 4:14 says, "How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while and then gone." So the day tomorrow is not guaranteed, but the plans of tomorrow aren't guaranteed as well. And we have been reminded of that this year in 2020. Another thing we've learned or been reminded of is that God made us for relationships. That's actually part of how he made us and designed us as human beings. And it's been more difficult this year, probably than any year in the past, to connect with others, to relate to each other the way that we're used to, the way that we'd like to, the way that we desire to. But during this time, we have been reminded that God made us for relationships. A couple of verses I want to remind you of is first Hebrews 10:24 and 25. It says, "Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day drawing near." And then 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, "Therefore encourage one another and build up one another just as you are doing." I don't know about you, but this year of 2020 has convinced me that I haven't been made for distance or quarantine or isolation or whatever it's being called in your city. That's not how God made me. God made me to be with other people. Now, I have the advantage that I'm an extrovert. I love to be around people. I get energy when I'm around people, but I have some introverted friends who very early on in this said, "I'm ready for people again." So we see that God made us for relationships. In fact, one of the things that really helped me see this, gave me a picture of this, was the very first Sunday that we regathered as a church. It was at the beginning of June, and we had several things in process so that we could gather as safe as possible. We wore masks. We sat every other row. We didn't linger here in our main hallway that we call Main Street, but rather we came in from the parking lot. We had our worship service, and then we left the building. We didn't hang out like we were used to, and it took me a little while to wrap up a few things. And as I was walking near our main entry, I looked out the doors, and I saw people out there. People were there outside talking to one another, and I think people hung around for probably 45 minutes or more, just connecting, because for many of them, that was the first time that they had seen their fellow church members and their friends in person, and that really reminded me that God has made us for relationships. Another thing that is a lesson or a reminder for us is what to do in times of crisis. What role does that play in our life? So two things. One is that in times of crisis, character, perspectives, and values are revealed. That means that what's on the inside it is exposed, that it comes out into the light. It's kind of like if you had a tube of toothpaste and you squeezed it because it's under pressure. All that toothpaste that comes out, you're going to get to see what was in the tube. So in times of crisis, when we're under pressure, what's on the inside comes out. But also in times of crisis, we need to go to God first. Our first response needs to not be, how do I figure this out? What do I do? But go to God. And a couple of reminders here, one verse is James 1:5. It says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, He should ask God, who gives it generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. That means if you don't know what to do, you need help, you need wisdom, go to God first and ask him to help you. Ask him to guide you, to show you the way. So these are some lessons and reminders for us that this year of 2020 has brought. Now, as we wrap up this year and we can see the end of the year just a few days away, I want to invite each one of us to consider a key question. And the key question is this, is how has COVID been my get out of jail free card? How has COVID been my get out of jail free card this year? Now, I recently heard a friend tell a story to a group, and he was telling this story that he had gotten into some discouragement and some self-pity, and ordinarily his wife would recognize that when that happens, and she came up and said, what's going on? And he's just said, COVID. And he said, she nodded and then just walked in the other room, and he realized that's an excuse pretty much for anything. COVID. It has become the great excuse or the get out of jail free card for us. Now, it's been that to different degrees for different ones of us, but how has COVID been an excuse to not grow spiritually, to not connect with God, to maybe just coast spiritually, maybe slack up on quiet times and spending time with God, or maybe just sort of just throw it out the door completely? Or how has COVID been an excuse to not take care of your body and eat right this year? I saw another meme. I don't have it for you, but it went something to the effect of, I know I need to get back in shape, but I'm waiting to see if the world will end before I put in the effort. It has been difficult to exercise, to eat right this year, but how has COVID been an excuse to not take care of your body? How has COVID been an excuse to not deal with the negative emotions that bubble up on the inside? Those negative emotions that normally we take those thoughts captive and we deal with them and we remind ourselves of truth, but right now because of COVID, we just sort of entertain those emotions and we let them run wildly in our hearts and our minds. How has COVID been an excuse to not manage your finances the way that they need to be managed? Or how has COVID been an excuse to not connect with others in a meaningful way? Now, it's no secret that it's more difficult to connect these days. And maybe you're not able to physically connect with others in other cities or states that you would like to be with, but we still need to connect with others. I mentioned just a moment ago that God made us for relationships. He made us to relate to him as our God and our creator, but he also made us for relationships to connect with each other. Now, because of COVID, there are a lot of legitimate concerns and barriers that exist right now. And many of the things that have happened in our life, or maybe things that we're used to doing, they might be difficult. More difficult than normal. Maybe we have to do them in a different way than we would like to or that we would prefer, but it's really just easy to use COVID as the excuse. I don't want to do whatever. COVID, another bag of Cheetos, COVID, whatever it might be, just COVID. So I want to challenge you to identify, how have you been using COVID as an excuse in your life, big or small? How have you been using it as an excuse to not do something that you know you need to do? Now, you might have to work a little harder, but you've really just let that area of life go and you've just blamed it on COVID. Now, this year has been challenging. I'll be the first to say it's been challenging. I started leading Hope Church on May 18th as I became the new lead pastor, and I started leading a church that wasn't meeting in person because of the middle of COVID. So I know, and I've experienced the challenges firsthand of COVID. And each of us have had our own unique challenges during this year. But I want you to hear for a few minutes from some fellow Hope members who have had their own unique challenges, But in the middle of those challenges, listen to what God has been doing. Listen to how God has been teaching them and growing them and training them during this time.
So for us, part of the challenge is that nothing is neatly divided into years. So some of the challenge has been a little bit preceding, but having to do with certain job-related things or finance-related things, kind of watching an industry that's like slowly going down and, I've had a little bit less work over time. And so that's been a bit of a stretch. So then this year made it a little bit of an extra challenge when we realized we were having another child. It was also a joy, but it was a little bit of a not quite sure how we're going to do that.
I think we found out that we were expecting Henry 2 weeks into lockdown when everything was extra. Like 2020 is just extra in general, but Brian and I had talked about the fact that we were thinking we're done having kids. And just like that, the Lord said, "No, you're not."
About 2 weeks before, something like that. 2 weeks before we were
expecting him to arrive.
Right. Found out some things about that my job was restructuring a whole bunch of things that could have spelled, the end of the job, basically. That it may not have been viable at all anymore. And, we're just about to have the baby. So that was the final the note of uncertainty there towards the end.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest challenge was just my mom's health began to decline. And I started noticing it really probably about a year ago. But then right about the time COVID hit, it became obvious that we were going to need to get help she was starting to have trouble with her memory and with just mental processing. And I just realized, we've got to pursue some medical help, even though that was the very time where all the doctors are like, don't come in here. We don't want you to come here. And so having to really make a lot of hard decisions about when do you take someone to the emergency room and when do you not, and then trying to get a diagnosis in the middle of all that. And then we just had to begin to do more and more in the way of helping my mom and helping her get treatment. And then in September, she had a big stroke, and then she ended up passing away at the end of October.
Well, I think the biggest one is just the financial hit. As a small business owner, I had 3 businesses that I was running, small, because two of them were just me. But because of this year, all 3 have basically shut down. And since March, I've had no income to speak of, like in my normal line of business. Now, that doesn't mean that I haven't had any income. I have been scrambling around trying to do all kinds of things, just whatever I can do to make enough income to pay the bills. From March until today, my income has dropped 90%. And we're still in the black. Every month we look at the bank account and go, we're not sure how this is going to happen, but it does. And today we are good through middle of January.
This year has really highlighted how much control I don't have over circumstances in life, and how my initial response to that is really to be afraid. My natural reaction to being out of control is to feel afraid and to want to try to get control of the situation, to somehow get my hands around it. And really, that was not happening in 2020.
Speaking of friendships and relationships, some of the good has come out, and encouragement that I want to give people is if you choose faithfulness and you take God at His word, He will oftentimes answer through people And one of the people that answered for us was a good friend of mine, a gentleman that I know in our group right now. I was calling and texting him a few times when Carol was really sick with COVID. She really had a tough go of it. And so I contacted him because his wife had COVID too with some similar symptoms. And I said, okay, here's what we're dealing with. And he kind of gave me some thoughts about, hey, here's what we tried, here's what didn't work. And then one day he just shows up at our house with something, with a remedy that they found very helpful. And I can still see him now opening my front door, and there he is, with his mask on, 6 feet away, because we're all still sick. And he just left the thing right on my front door. He and his son came. I don't know how far away they were. They don't live in our part of town, but and he didn't ask. I didn't ask him to do it. He just knew we had a need, and he showed up with the goods.
One other huge lesson for me that God has really, I think, put a big stone, an Ebenezer stone in my heart about is I was talking with a younger gal sometime early fall, and she was going through a hard thing, and I gave her this advice. I said, when you go through difficulty, that is God's invitation to you to draw closer to Him. And when I said that, I had no idea just how hard things were going to get. And when things started getting harder and harder, God kept bringing that back to my mind. And so almost daily, I would remember, you said this. So, it's time to really lean into what the Lord has for you. And I think that really helped me stay on track and not just totally lose it.
It's the importance of slowing down and just checking out, what is God doing here right now? One of the things that I try to mentor people through is that we all have a purpose. God created us with a purpose. That's one of the things that I love about hope, is everything we do with a purpose. So with that in mind, when challenges come up, what is the purpose? What is it that I need to be focused on? How is it that I can help?
The understanding I have now is so much deeper that may mean that we encounter more difficulty. But I know He'll be there at an even deeper level than I did before. I think it's that deeper level of, I know what the Bible says, and I know that it's true, but now I have experienced what the Bible says, and I have experienced its truth. And so it's not just something I know, it's something I've been through. So that is definitely the way I have experienced God, and that I couldn't have without this year.
Here are a few things to consider as we look forward to the new year, to 2021. First one, God is writing a much larger story than we can see today. 2 Timothy 1:9 says, "It is He who saved us and chose us for His holy work, not because we deserved it, but because that was His plan long before the world began, to show us His love and kindness through Christ." Now, however old you date the world to be, what I want you to get from this verse is long before the world began. That's a long time that God has been working. God has been writing a story that we are a part of, but a story that isn't just about us. It's really easy for us to get caught up in our moment of this story that we're a part of. In fact, all we see is what's right in front of us. When's the most important time in history? Well, obviously right now, because I'm alive. But God is and has been writing a much larger story. And let's not lose perspective of that as we walk through the challenges that we're in the middle of. Another thing I want us to think about as we move into this new year is that life is our training program. That means that God uses the stuff on our plate, the good and the difficult, to grow us, to train us. And because life is our training program, trouble is a part of that. And God even uses the trouble. So here are a couple of ways God uses trouble in our life. He uses trouble to cause us to seek and trust him. I want to look at a couple of passages of Scripture where the Apostle Paul is telling us of a couple situations from his own life. Now, Paul is a man who used to be an enemy to Christians, an enemy to the gospel, until he had a radical encounter with Jesus himself, and he had his life completely changed, and then he spent the rest of his life telling others about Christ, helping to start churches and encouraging the early churches. So we're going to pick up a story with Paul and his traveling companion Silas, where they are in prison at this moment. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted, "Stop! Don't kill yourself. We're all here." The jailer called for the lights and ran to the dungeon, and he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and he asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" You see, through this trouble that the jailer was experiencing, and for a jailer at this time in Rome, it was a big problem, big trouble for the doors to be open on the jail, because that would probably mean that all the prisoners were gone. That would be for sure a death sentence for this jailer. But Paul says, wait, stop, we're still here. As a result of that trouble, he stops and he says, what do I need to do to be saved? Now, I realize that not everyone turns to God in the moment of trouble. Not everyone in your life, everyone that you know, everyone that you've been praying for this year has turned to you and said, what do I need to do to be saved? But don't stop praying for them. Don't stop praying that God would reveal himself, that God would make himself known and real, and pray that there would be a point, a moment where this friend or family member of yours, that they would ask, what do I need to do to be saved? Now, here's another situation, also involves Paul. Listen to what he says. We're looking now at 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 10. He says, "We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die." That kind of sounds a lot like what this year has been like. You know, have there been moments where you didn't know if you were going to live through it? If you listen to too much media, you would expect that you would die, that you're going to get the virus and it's going to be an automatic death sentence for everyone in the world. So he goes on, though, and he says, but as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and we learned to rely only on God who raises the dead. He said, this problem was overwhelming. We couldn't handle it. But as a result, we had to rely on God, and he came through. And he did rescue us from our mortal danger. And he will rescue us again. We have placed our confidence in him, and he will continue to rescue us. Through this situation, Paul was forced to trust God in new ways. And as he trusted God in new ways, because he had an overwhelming situation to deal with, as a result, his trust grew. So this is part of the process. Part of the process is that trouble will cause us to seek and trust God. Another thing that happens with trouble is that God uses trouble to grow us and to train us. That's just part of the way God has designed things. I wish we could grow and be trained while we're just lounging on the beach somewhere, but that's not how it works. Often through trouble, that's what God uses to grow us. And then another way that God uses trouble in our lives is to minister to others. I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life where I have encountered trouble and pain and situations that I can't explain it. It's just sort of out of the middle of nowhere. Something bizarre happens. But then later on, sometimes weeks, months, and sometimes even years, I have what I call that's why moments. And here's what a that's why moment is that I will be meeting with someone, I'll be in a conversation with someone, and they'll begin talking about some trouble in their own life. And the Lord will say, that's why. Remember that thing you went through that you couldn't explain? I allowed you to go through that trouble so that you would be prepared to connect with and to empathize and to help this person who's in front of you right now. So sometimes the trouble that we go through is about our ability to help minister to others in the future. Now, finally, as we look forward to 2021, be prepared to share the hope that you have with those around you. 1 Peter 3:15 says, "Be ready at all times to answer anyone who asks you to explain the hope that you have in you." And our theme verse this program year, our program year goes from August through July. Our theme verse this year is 2 Timothy 1:7 through 8a. And it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. So never be ashamed to tell others about our Lord." We have hope inside of us, those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ, that the world around us desperately needs and at times is hopeless, and we have hope that we can share. Here are a few practical ways that you can share the hope that you have with others to bless them. And this is an acronym we've looked at sometimes in the past called BLESS, and I want to show it to you here again. B stands for begin with prayer. Just ask God for ways to bless the people in your life, your family, your neighbors, people that you work with, people that he sends across your path. The L stands for listen. I heard someone recently say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth because we need to be listening more than we talk. So just listen to those around you. Listen to their pains, to their struggles, to their hurts. Listen to what their year has been like this past year. And then the E is eat. You can eat a meal. A lot happens when you just take time and you sit down and you have a meal with someone. The first S is serve. After you've listened to them, after you've connected with them, then look for ways to serve them. And if it's your neighbor, maybe your neighbor needs help with something. One of the great results of having to stay home is I've heard all kinds of stories, me included. We've had ways to connect with our neighbors like we haven't had previously. So look for ways to serve. And then the last S is story. When the time is right, share your story. Share what God has done in your life. Share the gospel when the time comes. So this is just a few ways that you can share the hope that you have and look for ways to bless others in your life. Now, if you are a follower of Jesus, you have hope. So you want to share it. As this year that we're in is about to wrap up, I want to give you a couple of suggested actions. First thing I want to encourage you to do is to celebrate the end of this year with a James 1 party. We might be familiar with having a New Year's Eve party, but I want to put a little twist on it this year, and that is make it a James 1 party. What do I mean by a James 1 New Year's Eve party? It's this. James 1:2 through 4 says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when trouble of any kind comes your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For when you know that your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." So I want to invite you to have a James 1 party on December 31st. Here's some ideas. Get some ice cream, get some cake, maybe bake something, get some party hats and some streamers. And when you get ready for this year to wrap up, don't just say, "Thank God this year is over," but thank the Lord for the growth that has occurred. Thank the Lord for all that you have got to experience and endure that is teaching you and training you and helping you to become the person that God wants you to be. So that's the first suggestion. The next suggestion is to set aside 30 to 60 minutes to work through some personal reflection questions. Now, if you text questions to the number on the screen right now, we will send you this list of personal reflection questions. Here's just a couple of them. There's a whole lot more that are going to be on this document, but here's a couple of them to think through your experience of the year 2020. If you had to describe the year 2020 in 3 words, what would those 3 words be? What lessons have you learned this year? What big lessons? How has God answered your prayers specifically this year? What are you most looking forward to with 2021? And what do you want to be able to say about yourself 1 year from now? These are just a couple of the questions that I have on this 2-page document that we want to invite you to text to the number, and we'd be happy to send that. And take some time to really think about and process this year. This has been a difficult and a challenging year, so we need to think through it. 2020 may have been the worst year of your life. Or maybe after some thought and reflection, you realize it's been hard, but it's not really been as bad as I thought it has been. God takes the trouble, He takes the hurt, He takes the pain that we experience in life because we live in this broken world. He takes all of that and He uses it to grow us and to develop us into the person that He wants us to be so that we can be used by Him to make an impact in this world for His kingdom. May the Lord bless you and your family as we wrap up this year of 2020 and look forward to the new year of 2021. Would you bow with me in prayer? Father, I thank you that in the middle of this challenging, difficult year, that you have been near. You have not been far off, but you have been right there with us. Thank you that we can call upon your name, that you are our strength and our helper and our comforter and our deliverer and our provider. Thank you that all we need to do is to call out to you for help, and that you do help. You care deeply about each one of us. You care deeply about the pains and the hurts that we have. And this year has been a difficult year, but thank you that you have not abandoned us in the middle of this. I pray, Father, that you would help us as this year wraps up to really reflect on what all you have been doing in our lives. Show us the lessons that you intend for us to learn from this year. God, give us hope for this next year. We all want 2021 to be a lot different, but it's as we seek after you, as we follow you, that's where we really find hope. That's where we really find life. So I pray your blessings on the new year. In Jesus' name, amen.